Yeah, Shalom Akim, Kahalayim La, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Kodash, and double honors to the great Muslim apostles and the elder bishops of Great Millstone, and Thadi Yashai for the strength and all to make this video, and the Aratazar you find this video edifying and exhorting. Edify means to build up, exhort meaning to encourage. So I'm gonna just get straight into it because it's just a continuation of the previous video, which I named "It Can Be Scary, but it will aid you immensely." Which really what I'm talking about is also applying faith, because certain scenarios, Yahweh Hashem shall put you in scenarios where it can be scary, depending on how you are, but of course that's just to help to grow your muscle, the muscle of faith, really. As I got into in Hebrews 11, verse 1 and verse 6. But right now, I said in the next video, in the previous video, I said in the next one, I'm gonna read a chapter, and of course, this is Daniel chapter 3, because that's an example of a scary scenario. But of course, you knowing that Yahweh Shem Yahushai will protect you or guide you or really be with you in those moments is what's gonna help us to push through, whatever challenges we may face, which are really just mental, really. But at the end of the day, as long as we know, we have our knowing in Yahweh Shem Yahushai, we'll be fine through any sort of challenge. That's the type of mindset that we have to be in. We have to remind ourselves to be in, because oftentimes when going through these challenges, doubt and fear always comes to mind. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? All of that is just part of the imagination. It's part of what demons use. They try and leverage that, to really hinder you from making progress, especially in this ministry. So let me see if I can check it. I don't know if it's this, if it's in Wisdom of Solomon. Could be 17 maybe. Yeah, that's it. So Wisdom of Solomon chapter 17 and 12. It says, "For fear is nothing else but a betraying of the succors which reason offereth." Now, succors just means the help, the aid, which reason offereth, which means obviously your reasoning capacity, how you make logical decisions. And how we reason is via these scriptures, via these, the Holy Bible, which of course in the 1611 includes the Apocrypha. That's why we use it. Now it says in verse 13, "And the expectation from within," what you see within, you might visualize, okay, what if that happens? That's another expectation. "From within, being less, counteth the ignorance more than the cause which bringeth the torment. Which means what you visualize typically is more burdensome. It's like a weight that you have mentally, which is not really helpful to you. It's more heavier than the weight of the actual thing that happened. Because normally when you visualize, okay, what if that happens, and then you actually go through that experience as well of doing it, then you realize that it actually wasn't as bad as it could have been. So that's something where it comes to fear as well. Now it says, "For fear is nothing else but a betraying of the succors which reason offers." So that's Wisdom Solomon 17 and verse 12. Now that doesn't mean that just because, okay, you visualize something and then you actually try it out, that is these are really for profitable things. It's not everything where, okay, you just try it out for the sake of trying it out. For example, when it comes to the laws, which again, that's why I emphasize the fact that we reason with the scriptures. When it comes to the scriptures of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, the words of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, they help us as a guide, as we live this life in Esau's kingdom. Because when it comes to, for example, a simple example, such as pork, when you're in that awareness that, okay, you're not supposed to eat it, it doesn't mean that we fear Yahweh Shem Yahushai. That's the type of fear where you should have. But when it comes to, fear of lower level things like, let's say, for example, in the ministry, going out there in the highways and byways, that's the type of fear where it's like, no, you got to put that down, you got to go out there, and then you got to face the battlefield. That's really it, the spiritual battlefield, really. Because, it's demons that are aware of our role in this ministry too, so they're trying to hinder us using other vessels. But again, he hasn't given us a power spirit of fear, which I'm gonna get that. But first, I'm gonna get into Daniel 3. So really, I'm gonna get to this precept again as I'm reading it as well, because I believe it applies to this context with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All right, so let's see. Just bear with me out, Kim. It is a hot day today, so yeah. Anyway, so Daniel 3 and verse 1. I'm gonna read the whole chapter. Then, if I need to pause and explain something, then I'm gonna do that. So Daniel 3 and verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof was 6 cubits. And a cubit is about the length of an arm as well. And back in the day, people were taller too. So it's kind of, if you want to get a comparison, just for simplicity's sake, it does say it's the length of an arm. But of course, the length of an arm back in the day, especially for Israelites, we were much taller than we are on average right now. So again, the length would have been more so than the average Israelite height. So it says, let me read it again. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the score means 20, so that's 3 times 20. That's 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So essentially, pledge your allegiance and give reverence to this idol. That's what Nebuchadnezzar wanted from the people there. So the treasurers and the counselors and the sheriffs and all the rulers of provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud to you, it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages. So of course, with the vast majority of people there as well, Israelites were dwelling among this system that Nebuchadnezzar was in rulership too. So verse 5, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. So essentially saying, once you hear these sounds, the sounds of music, you all gotta bow your heads to this idol, to put it in true terms. So, and whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So anyone you don't worship, cast them to the burning furnace, to the fire, quite literally. So imagine skin's going to be burning, but we're going to see what happened to those who rejected it. So verse 7, therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore at the time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. So they spake and said to the king of Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth that, he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So really, that golden image, let me get another precept as well. Actually, I think, yeah, let me get it here. First Chronicles or Second Chronicles. Yep. Because that golden age, as I kept reiterating, was an idol. So this is First Chronicles 16 and verse 26. For all the gods, I'll start from verse 25. First Chronicles 16 and 25. For great is the Lord Yahweh, and greatly to be praised. He also is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord Yahweh made the heavens. And again, when you see L-O-R-D in the capitals, that's referring to Yahweh. Of course, this was before Yahushua was in the scene, but in the spirit realm, Yahushua was there as well, of course, doing the work that Yahweh commanded him. So, and it's true, it says, for great is the Lord Yahweh, and greatly to be praised. He also is to be feared above all gods. So really, Yahweh Shem Yahushua, Yahweh Wa Yahushua, which means, Wa just means and. So Yahweh and Yahushua is to be feared above all gods. Because they're the ones, again, where does it say again? Yeah, verse 26, it says, for all the gods of the people are idols, including that golden image that Nebuchadnezzar brought up as well. It says, but the Lord Yahweh made the heavens, which of course all the credit goes on to the Most High Yahweh. So that's really a precept there going into Daniel 3, because that golden image was an idol. It's not it's a false god. It's not even a god anyway, so it's a false power. That's why I like to refer to them as idols, man. So anyways, as I said, I can bear with me. It is a hot day today. Now verse 12. I'll read verse 11 again. Daniel 3 and 11, and whoso falleth not down and worshippeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So of course that would have been something to invoke fear within the people. But those of us who would have conviction in Yahweh Shem Yahushua, we don't need to worry about these things. Yeah, on the surface level it's like, oh, what if that? But if you cleared all that doubt, and of course we had absolute conviction in Yahweh Shem Yahushua, really there is nothing that we should fear, in this world that Esau tries to use to, because fear is like it is a hindrance when it comes to your reasoning or to your decision making. That's why again, I'll read it again. Wisdom of Solomon 17 and 12. For fear is nothing else but the betraying of the succors that reason offereth. So when you have fear, it betrays the help that reasoning gives us. And of course, when we reason with these scriptures in mind, the roots of that reasoning being the words of Yahweh Shem Yahushua. The thing is, fear is like a blockage. One can even call it a stumbling block to actually letting the flow of our reasoning happen. You get what I mean. The point is, fear is just it's like a block, when it comes to decision making. Right, so Daniel 3 and verse 12. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So of course these would have been seen as the rebels. Let's hold on, Alright, so as I was saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these would have been seen as the rebels of this system, of course that was under Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the same way Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're saying, let me read it again. It said in verse 12, Daniel 3 and verse 12. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods. So of course you probably could have seen them as of a decent high position, because it says certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs, the business, the systems, of the province of Babylon. So they were in they were in quite a good position. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship, which again, those so-called gods are idols, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. So of course, again, because of the fact that they were seen as rebels, which really they're just holding their integrity in Yahweh Shem Yahushua. That's really it, and that will translate into modern terms as well. Because in this time, that the major prophecy is really the MOTB, that chip implant. So of course, in that time when we then come across these Esau Edom saying, all right, you gotta take this, if you want to partake in society, and then we say no because we are retaining our integrity in Yahweh Shem Yahushua, Yahara Tazar, then of course he's gonna see us as rebels, man, of that society. Now of course, all we're doing is just rejecting the world at that point, and we're keeping our integrity, which integrity refers to strong moral principles, which is rooted in Yahweh Shem Yahushua. So that's all we're doing, because really in that time, it's true. I mean, whatever they label us as, the point is, how does Yahweh Shem Yahushua perceive us? In that time, Yaratazar, he will perceive us as loyal servants, which is really it when you hold your integrity of the scriptures. No matter what, presentation Esau gives in terms of threats of punishment. So let's continue on. This is Daniel 3 and 13 again. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage, fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all the kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that power that shall deliver you out of my hands? You can also perceive this as a mockery as well, saying from Nebuchadnezzar, saying, okay, who's going to deliver you from that fiery furnace? Because that he's going off of that reasoning that of physical laws, the laws of the 3D realm, but not knowing that Yahweh Shem Yahushua controls the 3D realm as well. So really anything can be changed and manipulated to the favor of Yahweh Shem Yahushua. So that's really it. And in this moment, because of the integrity of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you're going to see that they had nothing to really worry about. They had nothing to worry about. That's also another reason why you should also pray for strength as well. Because when you pray for strength, that can be in a whole plane of it can be interpreted as a whole plane of a variety of ways, because strength, integrity is also a form of strength, a form of mental strength, and of course there's physical strength as well, but really it's the spiritual strength that surpasses all of them. So the strength is chazak as well, chazak in the ancient Hebrew. So Babak Shah, Nathan Laya, which means Babak Shah means please, Nathan Laya meaning give me, Nathan meaning give, and then Nathan Laya means give to me. So give to me, because the law meaning to, and then Yah referring to yourself. So me. So Babak Shah, Nathan Laya, Chazak, something simple like that. Just keep saying it, especially in your moments where you may be a little bit weak. Pray that, and you have to know that strength has already been given to you as well. As the scriptures say, doubting nothing. So, because our power source is rooted in Yahweh Shem Yahushua, so we ought to pray in order to get that strength. Now let's continue. So Nebuchadnezzar, I'll read verse 15 again. Daniel 3 and 15. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all the kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that power that shall deliver you out of my hands? You could be in prison for not taking the MOTB. As the scriptures say, some of you shall be casted into prison. If I'll get that one quickly. So you'll be casted into prison. Let me just read. Hold on. Yep, Revelation 2:10. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried. And ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. So it's the same way Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were faithful unto death. You're going to see why, because they were threatened by Nebuchadnezzar saying, we're going to cast you into fire, and we're going to see who's going to save you then. So as I was saying, the example was we could be cast into prison, for saying rejecting the MOTB, rejecting the chip implant. Then from there, they could play around with you, whatever. When I say play around with you, I'm talking about probably feed you, throw you some food, and not feed you for some days. So that's part of the test as well. That's part of the trial. But in spite of that, the point is to maintain integrity of Yahweh Hashem Yahushua. As Yahushua said also, man shall not live by bread alone. So don't let food, don't let any so-called security of life, be a hindrance to you, or be a way of manipulation. Because that's the thing, man, with these so-called necessities, which the scriptures do talk about the necessities of life, but nevertheless, Yahushua did say, man shall not live by bread alone. And really, we're living in times where, as we get to a higher level of faith, and through a higher level of faith, we don't need to rely on these necessities, because really, it's Yahweh Hashem Yahushua that preserves the body. It's Yahweh Hashem Yahushua that allows you to even process the food. It's Yahweh Hashem Yahushua, He gives you the strength of your bones, your muscles. So it's not really, without Yahweh Hashem Yahushua, all of this so-called necessities, won't be a thing. Yahweh Hashem Yahushua put the potency of those necessities for you to consume. I'm talking about food here. Now let's get this. So this is Sirach, also known as Ecclesiasticus, chapter 29 and verse 21. It says, the chief thing for life is water, bread, and clothing, and an house to cover shame. So it says here, water. The chief thing for life, it says, so these are the necessities for life. Water, bread, which is, of course, water, you consume liquids. Bread, referring to food. Clothing, of course, what you wear on your body. And a house to cover shame, to have your own privacy. So that's really the necessities of life. Esau's going to go through, he's going to try and use those. Water, as we know, of course, here in the UK and certain places as well. They have a hose pipe ban that's going on as well. Currently, saying currently, but really it was, I think it was 2 weeks ago as well, certain areas, it was around 10 p.m, when I realized that the water was going down. When you run the tap, it was reducing in terms of its, when it fully flows, but then it reduces in its capacity to flow, if you get what I mean. So, Esau's using that. He's trying to use water. So these are like trailers. These are like teaser trailers, to use a movie reference. These are like teaser trailers to what he's going to do next. Where those who don't have the MOTB, the water's going to be cut off. The food supply is going to be cut off, because you ain't going to be able to buy unless you have a chip implant. You ain't going to be able to go to the supermarkets. What else was it? And so Ecclesiasticus 29 and 21, I believe it was. So it was water, bread. So there, water, food, Then it said clothing. So of course you can't get new clothes. Nevertheless of that. Then the house as well. So people be kicked out of their houses because of the fact that they don't have the MOTB. That's the point. Because that's really the thing. If you don't own the land, you can easily be kicked off of that land, because the person who own the land, they have the true ownership of what's going to be on top of that land. That's really it. So even if you pay the mortgage off, Esau's always got some kind of a loophole to say, all right, get out of here. Anyway, so back to integrity. Daniel 3 and verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our power, which is Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushua, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. You see, it takes conviction, it takes integrity to say, in spite of your punishment of trying to burn us, we know Yahweh Shimshai is gonna deliver us. That's the point. End of, because there is nothing. That's the answer. That's really the answer. That's the best answer you could have given. So it's the same way they said that if it be so. So Daniel 3 and 17, if it be so, our power in we, and it said, notice how it says if it be so as well, because it could have been a case where, all right, they literally had to suffer the burning and just die, and then that's back to the spirit realm. So they said, if it be so, our power, whom we serve, Yahweh Shem Yahushua, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, which of course that shows a great level of faith that they believed Yahweh Shem Yahushua would deliver them from that burning fiery furnace, to not suffer any burning of the skin. Anyways, let's continue. So, deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. And they said that with conviction, a firmly held belief. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So they're saying, if it's not so that we gotta die, we ain't gonna worship your idol. They said it straight up. And that's it, because we have to start operating in that mindset where whatever threats Esau makes, really they're really all weak threats, because it's perspective here that we have to have. It's perspective. As I just read there in Ecclesiasticus 29, I believe, verse 21, about the chief thing of life, the necessities of life. These are things that Esau would use to try and get a hold of, to try and manipulate people, especially Jake, to take that MOTB. Nevertheless, you got to see it in this scenario too. Let's say Esau cut off your water, let's say, water, electricity, what helps the house be to maintain the house, essentially. In that time, let's say he could be cutting off all other people's, but your house could be the one that has that, as I say, magically, which is really spiritually, electrical current still flowing through. You can still have your lights on, you can still have your tap water still flowing as well. You can still have, electricity still flowing. The way a normal house is still maintained, electricity, water, gas still working. Even though maybe the gas has run out or something, wherever you're living, it depends how it works. But whatever resources that you use normally to maintain the house, Yahweh Shem Yahushua is just let that keep flowing. You don't have to understand how it works. Really, all you got to know is that Yahweh Shem Yahushua is still looking after me. So don't be surprised in that time if, the time where Esau's just, cutting off electricity, that your one is still flowing. That's also something. In terms of food, don't be surprised if someone knocks your door and then delivers you a piece of baked bread or some food, maybe even a ready-made meal. You don't know if an angel could have knocked that door and then disappeared in an instant. So it's perspective here. That angel was sent by Yahweh Shem Yahushua to help you. And you got to know that as well. That's the reason why I'm reading this chapter, because it's all about perspective here. When you retain your integrity, you don't have to fear, these weak threats. Of course, to a lower level mind, who doesn't reason with these scriptures, they'll think that, how am I gonna get food? How am I gonna get water? Yahweh Shem Yahshua will provide. And of course, that time will be a very potent time. I've been saying potent a lot lately. Just don't mind me. It's just that word potent. Anyway, so yeah, the strength of it. In that time, it will be tested. The strength of our faith will be tested in those times with the regular necessities. That's why even right now, fasting is also a practice to help you detach from these necessities as well. Fasting from food typically, dry fast, water fast, whichever one you can do. Yahweh Shem Yahshua sees your efforts. Let's continue. So Daniel 3. So yeah, this Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, we're not going to worship your golden image. We're not going to worship your idol. So verse 19. So Daniel 3 and 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. So he really wanted that. He intended for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to really burn and feel the pain. Now verse 20, and he commanded that the most mighty men that were in the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So with their clothing, they cast them into that furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men and took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the ones who increased the heat, they died from it. Now verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished, so he was shocked, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. So this was the moment where, what does it say? Yeah, this was the moment that Nebuchadnezzar was thinking, am I tripping? What am I seeing here? So verse 25, he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men. That's why he thought he was tripping. Which really he wasn't. He was seeing 4 men. So he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men, loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurts. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of the Most High. That's a clear indicator that it was Yahushua, because only he has that name, the Son of the Most High. So that's referring to Yahushua. Yahushua was in the midst of them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The same way we got to believe as well, Yahushua will preserve us in whatever time of challenge that we're in. Which really, another sign of high faith is just being calm in spite of the scenario. And of course, we have our practices. Sometimes you be stressing in the world, but nevertheless, it's being calm in spite of these challenges. That's really, and as your faith increases, this will aid in that. That's why I named the title. It can be scary, but it will aid us immensely, which means it will help us immensely. Just faith. What will help us? Faith in Yahweh Shem Yahshua will help us immensely. So verse 26, Daniel 3 and 26, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men. upon whose bodies the fire had no power, which means the typical burning, it had no effect. Nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on them. So not even the smoke. The smoke typically attaches to clothes as well. If you're there, that's why sometimes when you cook certain foods, that smell just attaches to your clothes. So it's the same with fire as well. That smoke attaches to clothing. That smell wasn't even on them. It wasn't on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Alright, so coats changed, no smell of fire had passed on them. Verse 28, so Daniel 3 and 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the Most High of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's words, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. So even Nebuchadnezzar gave them reverence. He gave them reverence, man. And really reverence to their power, which was Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. So verse 29, therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the power of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces. Now that's cold. Because now it comes from, alright, worshipping the idol to now worshipping the power of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. So that anyone who don't let me read it again, hold on. It says, let me read it again. Daniel 3 and 29. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the power of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other power that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they got high positions. But nevertheless, the point is, he had so much reverence. He said, anyone who speaks against their power, pretty much finished, man. House like a dunghill, they'll be cut into pieces, pretty much killed, thrown away, done. So that also put fear in the other people to respect Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, in this scenario, respect their power. So that's really it. Man. I really just made the points during the thing. The real thick point to remember is that we don't need to fear, Esau removing any necessities. All we have to do is have faith. Now, the level of faith is going to have to be higher, because of course, believing in these miracles, as I made in multiple examples during these, as I was reading it, that higher level of faith will help us. It will help us in these times. That's the point, and it will help to calm down your vessel as well. Anytime them thoughts of doubts come in, just clear it. Just clear it, especially when it comes to scenarios where we ought to again stay faithful in Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. Alright, final precept then. We'll get down to business. Alright, so let's see. Alright, so this is 2 Timothy 1 and 7. For the Most High hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. So power, love, and a sound mind. If he's given us a spirit of power that conquers any form of power, within this physical realm. It's giving us a spirit of love and of a sound mind as well. A sound mind typically is calm and it's not agitated, just because of other things that are happening externally. So again, pray for that spirit of power, spirit of love. Of course, because we show our love by our obedience to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, and have a sound mind as well. A healthy, calm mind, a strong mind as well. That's also a sound mind too. So I'll leave it there. Yaratazar, you found it. Again, edifying to build up your knowledge, build up your faith, and exhorting to encourage you to keep going, so that you know what to do in these scenarios. Always pray, Baba Kusha, Nathan Laya, Chazak. Simple ones like that, man. As you learn the ancient Hebrew, you'll be able to formulate your own little prayers as well. So I'll leave it at that. Shalom, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua Barakatah.